Erg tof, compensator. بعرف اني لو مربر بعفريت كاشيا افال اغلين تسبسد just a little question. I wanted to basically do the talk I gave last Monday at ReactiveConf, which is quite a high over abstract talk about state management. But since last week, hooks came out, and I know that you had all the time to learn it. But so we could also dive into hooks and make it more hands-on. So could I see a quick vote that you prefer? Either dive into hooks and learn how hooks make React next best thing since sliced bread, or state management. So let's talk about hooks. They were introduced last week at ReactConf. Well, they're not introduced yet, it's just a proposal, not a real feature. But let's first talk about why they were introduced. And it's actually to solve a lot of ergonomical problems around components, especially function components, which were like introduced 2 years ago or something, and we're always sort of liking them because it's so nice to write a React component just as a function. Also, functions don't have issues with this and bind and messing up or needing to bind function in the constructor. And function components minimize really well because every class property in a class cannot be minimized because the name has to be consistent. But that's not the case for function components. But the problem was always with function components that they effectively were stateless. You couldn't have state in them. If you needed that, then you needed to refactor back to a class component. And also you couldn't use lifecycle methods like mounting, unmounting, did update. So basically you couldn't have anything that was side effect related, like interacting with the history API or fetching stuff or those kind of things. And they also could not be pure. That's surprising to most people, but actually they weren't. And I noticed also that glean was developed around here somewhere to fix the refactoring problem. But anyway, maybe glean is not needed anymore now. Because the idea of hooks is basically to solve all those issues with class versus function components. And another thing I didn't put on the slide, because I only made it in the plane, is that when you use a lot of callback function components, where you had like a component that could listen to, I don't know, the window size, and then when it changed it needed to re-render, then you got this whole tree of nested components. So basically you got the kind of callback hell in component shape. Does that ring a bell? Okay, cool. So that's what hooks try to fix. And it's probably the easiest to show by just live coding it. Okay, so here we have a super simple function component. And it renders something more useful. How old is it fix? 10 years or something? I don't know. So, this is a function component. And so the problem we always had is that like, we have this person, but we cannot change this person because function component cannot have state. So there's no set state call to update this piece of data. So I have this update function here, which I trigger when I change the text. But it's basically frozen, nothing happens. And I could try to implement this, but this .setState won't work. Basically because there is no set state. So now I get an error. And if the tooltip goes away, great. Obviously, this would like not feel syntactically, it would run, but it wouldn't have no effect because it doesn't cause a rendering. And so that is basically the goal they set out to fix with hooks. to make it possible to have lifecycle events and state in a function component. And so to use state, you can use the state hook. And then you can call it like this. And then you get back a tuple, so an array of 2 items. And the first item you get back is the state you put into the state. That sounds kind of stupid. And the second thing you get back is a function to update the state in the future. So basically set person. And now comes the amazing trick. I can call this function set person. And take the previous person and just replace his name. And ideally, if I did everything right, this should work. So now we have state in a function component.
What's the point with the state component?
Well, it turned out that they're quite hard to read because they're quite easy to make mistakes with, like with the binding of functions and forgetting about how this works. They are hard to minimize and also not really nicely composable. We always thought that components were quite composable, especially once the render callback became quite standard. But I hope to show you later on that this is way more composable than our previous abstractions are. Okay, let's take a closer look at what it's doing. So this, of course, so this set person, that's basically a function that updates the state. And that also causes React to re-render. So that's in that sense quite similar to set state. You can also use it as a function like we did with a state before. It's actually probably the better way to do it.
Can you use it with a class?
No, it cannot be used with class components. But here's a piece which I found quite confusing first when I was reading this code, which is quite unnatural to JavaScript. So you realize that this set person will update the component, right? That makes sense. But then the function starts to run again, and that means that this entire function, this entire app, will start executing again from top to bottom. So you will again go through this use state function, and then it looks like you're again initializing your state to this object you passed in here. So that's the confusing part about hooks, and that's also why some people are against it, because this is quite a strange pattern in JavaScript. But how hooks really works is that React remembers which hooks it executed for this component. So if this component is rendering a second time, and you call useState, it will know like, oh, this is not initial render. So instead of returning at initial state, which I got, I will just return the state that was passed to me previously through that setPerson function. And so it just recognizes that, so you can have many states. So you can also have, I don't know, so you can use your states many times. So then the question is like, how does React keep track of which state to return for which use state call? Right, because it's if you call setPerson, it has to know that I need a pointer, I think, that this person was updated and not this birthday. So it needs to be connected. And so what React does, it tracks how many times you invoke the useState hook, for example. So it means that you have to always invoke them in the same order, otherwise everything will be messed up. It also means that you cannot say like if this or that state is true, and only then call the use state, because then in some conditions you will have one state or sometimes two, and then again you mess everything up. So the point is that all the hooks you use always need to be called on top level without any conditional branching or looping around it. Otherwise, React won't make any sense of it. But that being said, it results in quite a clean pattern because you have really small components where all the state is nicely declared on the top. And also you can have separate states instead of class components where you had only one state object. One more thing to mention is that, of course, your initial state, it might be something expensive, like and now whenever we run this app component, we always are creating this new object with Wix and H10, but it's only relevant for the first render, right? So all the other times we are creating this object in vain because it's not used. Everybody see why that's true? So what you can do alternatively is, if whatever is you pass in is expensive, is you can pass in a function. I have to fix the syntax. So this component still does exactly the same, except because it's a function, React can on next runs just skip this function from being evaluated so that it doesn't have to allocate the object. Which in this case totally doesn't matter, but this can be something expensive maybe. And still on each run in this case you would create that function, so you could even leave that function outside. Yeah. And now it's really not doing anything on subsequent renders for its initial state. But that's quite a detail. I don't think you have in general have to think about it because just allocating a few objects is so insanely cheap it doesn't matter. Another nice advantage of these hooks is that they don't make collisions. So I can try an example, but I need some help of you guys, I think. So suppose that you want to display over here the window width. And so we could be introducing some state for that window width. So who's good at JavaScript? How do you determine the width of a screen? Look, I didn't have any Google in the airplane. Right, wow, that works. Okay, but this doesn't really do anything because it's, well, it's just fixed. So we also want to set up a listener. And I think that's resize. Sorry.
It doesn't have to be. It could be anything.
No, it could be anything. Could be anything. I'm not sure if this is the right event. Okay, it doesn't really matter. I think you can see the pattern here. That the handler calls the updater, and that should again cause the thing to re-render. But this is messy because this would attach a listener every time this component renders. So for that, React introduced another hook, namely useEffect. And useEffect, in principle, renders after each time the component updated. So that is actually the place where we want to establish this listener. And the most interesting thing about it, it can also return a function which contains the logic you would do on a unmount, so to clean up. So you can, from this function, you can return a new function, which basically is the document remove event listener. And I think you have to pass the handler in this one, right? Handler. Yeah. Handler. You see, you should just have asked for the prepare talk. Cool. Okay. Okay, so that works. And now we have nicely combined this logic of an event listener. We're not entirely there yet. So one problem with useEffect is useEffect runs every time the component did update. So that means that every time the component rendered, it will establish listener and also clean up the previous listener. So at least we have one listener, but we attach and detach the whole time. But that you can fix by giving a second argument to useEffect. And the second argument says basically anything which is passed in here, that can be any piece of state, can be any variable. But if that piece of information you pass in that array is different from the previous time, only then the effect will be executed. And so in this case, we can pass in nothing. And that is effectively the same as only running the effect on mount and on unmount. So basically now we have made a component on mount handler which sets up the listener and a unmount handler which removes it.
Quick question, why do it this way instead of just using component will mount and component will unmount?
Because those are not available in function components. So in classes you can use mount and unmount, but this is just a function, so we cannot define fields on it.
That's what I'm saying, why not just make it a class instead of a function? You're pretty much doing everything the same.
Yes, except here's something cool which you cannot do with a class. I can take all this code, cut it, make a function use window width, paste all that same stuff there, and just return the window width in here. So now I have the same component. It still exactly works the same. But this function, this use window width, I can just put it in a library or in some file and I can reuse it in any other component. And the cool thing is that this composes where, for example, component did mount and unmount don't compose because either you have to use inheritance and supercall them or you have to call a component from a component. So this is syntactically way nicer because the hooks and the state from all the things you mix in, they never collide. There's no name collisions. So if I introduce here, I can call this one let's rename. So I can call this one X. Basically, it really doesn't matter how it's called. And I can call this one also X. And the nice thing is that we don't have any name collisions or something. And the only thing we could avoid name collisions in the classic way was by composing components. But then you got something like window with rendering. Right? Then you got all this nesting for every different kind of effect you were using. And so now I can use all the different kind of effects I want. Click outside handlers, window widths, history subscriptions, observable subscriptions, without me needing to nest all those components together. I can just all mix it in at the top of the function component and reuse it. So I hope that makes a good case for it. Of course, it can be debated. Now there's one more thing I want to show you, just to make it a bit more tricky. Hey, I'm tech, but shut up. And bring it back to the mobix field, so that I can still talk about mobix somewhere in this talk. And let's take a nice example. So here we have basically the same component as we just saw. The app with a person and a name. But this time we had observer around it. Who's familiar with mobix? Right, so just to explain quickly, what observer does, it makes sure that the component automatically re-renders for any observable value that is used in the component. So in a normal mobix application, we can have this person, which is an observable. It can live completely outside of the component. It can live in a completely separate module. And then by just putting observer on a component, that means that in the future, whenever this person changes, this app component will re-render because it's using this observer. So that means that the mobix library automatically establishes just the relationship between consumers and producers of information. And so that means that it makes state handling much more simple. But now the interesting challenge is how does this observer work and how can we implement it? And maybe it's nice to first show that's actually working. So if I change the name or the age, then that component will automatically update, even though that component doesn't have this person in its state. I mean, this person is not part of the state of the component. It's just living outside here, actually. This would make that even more clear. So this is basically just a presentational component. I mean, it really doesn't have any state on its own or something. But because it's an observer, and because of the fact I am rendering person.name over here, and person .h over there. It will re-render if I change those fields.
The proxy on the KPS.
Possibly, depends on which version you are using.
In the newest version?
Yeah, in the newest version, yes. But that being said, so that's MobiX. But the interesting question is like, how does this observer thing work? Because that's using hooks as well. And by demonstrating that, you also get nicely an idea how MobiX itself is working, hopefully. So this is just the same app. The only thing I did was making this file empty. So I passed my component to this observer function, and then I get the component back. This is a stupid implementation, it doesn't do anything, which is also what you see here. It just returns the components, so that's quite obvious. And so what we actually want is return a true component. So this is still basically the same component, right? Everybody along with it? I just call the component is just a function, so I just call it with the original props I received, and I directly call it. I'm going to make another piece of state. Everybody any idea what this function tick is doing if I call it?
It's the same name.
Oh, wait. Sorry. I make it underscore. That's how you roll, right? So what would the effect of calling tick be? Yeah, exactly. Somebody said it. Re-render. I mean, this function doesn't do anything useful except it forces my component to re-render because I changed the state. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the reason to re-render this component. Then I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful world of reactions in MobiX. It's just a debug name, so it doesn't matter. And so a reaction is a very interesting object. It's basically an object that manages the tracking of a side effect in MobiX. So it can do two things. It can you can give it a function, and then it will track for you what observables were used during execution. And then you can give it another function, and that is where you tell it what to do if any of those observables you used changed. And so that second function, that's the one we're passing in here. So this function is basically telling MobiX what should happen if observables are changing. And so the answer to that is, what do we want to happen if observables change? Render, exactly. So here we can call tick with underscore, very important. Okay, and so then the next question we have is like, what should it be tracking? What piece of functionality do we want to know that involves observables? The rendering, yes, I heard it somewhere. So what you can tell this reaction is, we can say track, and then we give it a function to execute. And at that moment, everything that's done inside that function will be associated with this reaction. So mobix knows that. So we just determine that this is rendering. So now this reaction will start to run our original component code. And if there's an observable used inside that component code, this reaction will take notice of that. And if any of those observables changes, then our tick gets called. Okay, then we still miss one piece that we need to return the actual rendering here. So let's declare it. And so this should be basically our initial implementation. And now it should, cross fingers, respond. Yes, it does. So now, by leveraging reactions, we can now hook into the mobix administration of how observables are used and how relations are established. So just to go back, so sorry?
If we wanted to render this number that is ticked to.
Well, we could just we could just pass in, right? So I think we should now have tick over here. Just curious. Yes, so it's ticking. Well timed.
Do you call track on each render? Do you call hard the track is called on each render?
Yes, exactly. So, sorry?
It's not a problem to call it every time three renders? New function calling?
No, the tracking we want to call is render. That's very important because the tracking is dynamic. So if you have like a branching in your component, then in the next render you might be using different observables, which means that different subscriptions are being set up. But you do bring up a very good point, because you're now creating a new reaction every render. But we already saw earlier how we can fix that part by using effect. So we can put this part in an effect that only renders once. Oh, no, no, that's not true. No, sorry. Scratch the last 30 seconds. I didn't say anything about effects. Right? No. But the point you want to avoid is to make this reaction every time this thing renders, because we want just one administration, that's fine enough. And there's another hook for that. That's called use memo. And so use memo, actually, I think it's used like that. It basically says something or remembers something. It's basically a cache. So it memoizes a value so that you get it immediately back on the next run, rather than running it initializer each time. So now it still works, and we are not creating all those loosey reaction objects. And then there's basically only thing left, and that is whenever this component is removed, we also don't want to be listening to all those observables anymore. So we need to dispose the reaction, which we can do with reaction.dispose. And then again, we do it in a use effect. So by using an empty array here, that's how we got it to only run on amount and on mount. And suppose we don't want to do on mount, but only on unmount. So the effect is basically nothing, but it does return a cleanup function, which, if you write it weird, boils down to this. And so now we have the complete mobix tracking setup without leaking memory. And that is basically what I wanted to show you about hooks and how composable and flexible they are. Because on this side of the page it's all super clean and neat. Questions?
Isn't the problem that you're tracking multiple times?
No, that's...
Many renderings that you will only see one, but it will render good.
No, that's because that's no problem, because the scheduling of React itself is still preserved. So even if you would, so React has built in a scheduler that only renders when there's, I don't know, after a tick or after it's idle. And so this component won't go into re-render. I mean, this set stick, basically it schedules a render, it tells React to please render this. But it won't actually render until React decides that components need to be updated. And so only at that point, when it's rendering a second time, then this tracking happens again. So it tracks exactly as many times as React really is rendering. And if you do a lot of updates in quick succession, you still get only one render phase.
So it's like once it will render the tracked version, and then it will render the updated version with the rendering.
No, it will always track if it renders. But the set tick, it's like set update or set state currently. It's asynchronous. So this the tick just tells React this is the next state I want to render, but it doesn't really cause the rendering to happen.
So the flow is change state,
yeah. Then it gets queued. So the question is, how does all those use state calls get associated with the right data, right? How does it determine what data belongs to what use state call? And the answer to that is that it's just the runtime ordering of use state calls.
You mentioned if there are two use states, it will be based on the order, right?
Yes.
But how does it know, even if there's just one, how does it associate with the components it's in? Because you're not passing in like components reference.
Yes. That is a really good question. Let's see if I can answer that clearly. So the point is, when you write GSX code, so this may not be a good example. Let's say I have my component over here. Calling my component is not a function call. It's just a description of a function call. And so that means that React, before it starts rendering a component, it will just keep a variable, this is the component which is currently rendering. And then it picks all the state associated with that component, like the normal reconciler does. But this is a good point you bring up, because there's something very tricky. Because what you could do normally in React is like, instead of writing my component, assuming this is a function component, you could also do this, right? You just directly call it as a function, you pass in some props maybe, but that is how you could call a function component. Nobody did it because it's not supposed to be done that way, but it could be done and it would work. You just don't get any reconciliation if you do it this way, so it's less efficient. But once you use hooks, you shouldn't be doing this anymore, because then you really can mess up the use state. Because what would happen if you have like my array map value my component, and then you pass that value to that function component, right? Then if the array length changes, then it starts messing up the states of all those components. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. It's like, really don't call function components as functions. Call them using JSX or using create element. Because otherwise you could be in for a very subtle bugs.
Additional question to this topic. Will it work with the combined dynamic name components? Like when you combine same name for component, it's called dynamic with 6.
Yes, like that you generate a component name based on.
What's our dynamic variable?
I'm not sure whether that's possible. I think what you can do is, I think this would work. And then just put if display name is a test. Okay, now it's full syntax errors, so all the other messing around. I think you can set display names this way, but I'm not entirely sure. But if you are not writing a higher order function like this, then you don't. I'm not entirely sure how to influence the display name in function components. Thanks. I hope this was helpful.